Well, I hug all of you with all the powers of my virtual hug coming your way. Well, it's good to be together. I hope that all is well with you and that you feel comfortable and relaxed here in your smoky cloud. You're also welcome to move if you like.
I'll see if it sticks with me.
It's hard to, I know. So, or you could just go back and forth depending on whatever you need to do. Whatever you need to do, yeah.
It's supposed to mean something, right?
Does it?
Is on you?
I think it's like a special blessing,
Okay.
right? You need it?
Now it's coming towards me.
Yeah, good. Well, let's begin as we always do with just 1 or 2 minutes in silence to be aware of God's presence with us, within us, among us, in this beautiful afternoon in the fire as we begin. Amen. Well, it is good to be with you on this Friday. My friend Diane Larmy's here. Woo! She's otherwise known as Zoe's mom. Hey, Zoe. Grab your lunch, babe. So what we're gonna do, I'm so excited because we have kind of a historic woman in Africa and a real live one in Africa. So she's the real live one.
Don't get those confused.
I know, I've got some history on me too, but anyway, that's another matter. So I'm going to tell you the story of Lillias Trotter, and then we're going to read some of her words. We've got handouts over there. Hey, Zoe, do you mind giving people handouts if they need them? Thank you. I doubt that any of y'all have heard of Lillias Trotter. Am I wrong? Has anybody heard of her? Okay. This was a name that sort of, I've heard of her, kind of. There's a new film about her called Many Beautiful Things that you can actually rent on Amazon. I watched it. It's quite actually beautiful about her art and her biography. But I'm going to tell you a couple things about her, and then we'll read some of her words together. She was born in 1853 in England. This was the golden age of Victoria, was her era. So you think of private governesses and horse-drawn carriages. She was from a very wealthy family. They lived on the West End of London. So she was the classic, young person of privilege. She was also a very spiritual person, even from a young age. She was very, very spiritually receptive. And at that time in England, as I understand it, there was a real movement among Christian people in particular to go beyond kind of the pro forma, Sunday services and into what they called the deeper life. There was an actual movement called Deeper Life Movement. And you think of Keswick Conference, and they would have these conferences and Bible studies, and there was a real intensity among certain Christians in that time, and she got really involved in that. So even as a young person, very hungry for this experience of intense spiritual life. She says that she set the rudder of her will towards God's purposes. And one of the purposes that she felt that God was calling her into was care for women in particular in London. There were many working women. I guess this was the Industrial Revolution. Maybe they were working in factories or in service, in domestic service. And she was part of the YWCA, which is a new movement at the time, setting up this hostel for women, for London working girls. And she also really had a heart for the women by Victoria Station who were doing sex work. They had really no other options. And so she would, look for ways to serve them with practical help and also connect them with training for skills. And she was part of setting up the first public restaurant for women, because I guess that only men were allowed in restaurants at the time. I'm not sure. But anyway, these working women on their lunch breaks had nowhere to go, nowhere to sit, nowhere to eat. They would eat their lunches on the sidewalk. And so Lillias Trotter and some of her sort of colleagues set up this restaurant for women, a place to go, which I think is really wonderful. So that was part of what she sensed that God was calling her into, was service. But on the other hand, she was a really incredible artist. And the story goes that when she was she was a young woman, she and her mother were traveling in Venice, as one did at the time, and she was down there sketching and painting. And they heard that John Ruskin was there. He was one of the sort of the foremost art critic of the time in Victorian England and was quite respected. And so Lillias's mother wrote to John Ruskin and maybe sketches and said, "I'd like to bring you to meet the great master Ruskin." And when he met her and he saw her art, he was quite taken with her talent. And this was the beginning of a lifetime relationship between John Ruskin and Lillias Trotter. And there's been actually a lot of new scholarship on her work, his work, their relationship. It's very interesting. But he recognized in her a rare talent. And he said that if she cultivated her art, she would become one of England's greatest artists. And part of her talent and part of her passion was for nature. And Ruskin was the same. Hey, that's a good spot for you. Was for nature. So she loved to go in nature, observe nature, paint nature, draw nature. And as we'll see in the reading, she also used her experience in nature as a way of seeing God and understanding spiritual truths. So there she was painting, and John Ruskin had her out into the country, to his country house, and she was just flourishing as an artist. Meanwhile, kind of making trips back to London to do some of her work. And at one point, Ruskin confronted her pretty much and said, "You can be immortal through your art, but you must give it everything, from this day forward, pretty much. This is your decision. Will you become this great artist that you can be and should be?" And she speaks of like running around in the woods. She was just completely distraught by this kind of ultimatum, but she saw that, she had these that were, her love of God, her love of service, her art, her talent, and she really had to make a decision. And she talks about making a decision to kind of walk away from this commitment to art, her full commitment. And she kept her art up to the end of her life, sketching and drawing, but she never would become this artist that Ruskin said she could be. But she said that she described her decision in this way. She said she claimed the liberty of those who have nothing to lose because they have nothing to keep. We can do without anything while we have God. And she was described as a person who had a grand independence of soul. And you think about what it meant, because her friends, her family, everyone was scandalized that this incredibly talented woman, and a woman no doubt, would give up the opportunity to be the greatest artist. But that was the decision she made. She moved back to London and really immersed herself in social service. And she was at a meeting in 1887 of a mission society, or the topic was foreign missions. And the speaker said, "Is anyone in this room called to serve God in Algeria?" And she said, "That's me." And she literally put up her hand. "That's me." And she hadn't known it until she heard this call. And so she knew then what God was calling her to. It's quite unexpected. So she applied to the North African mission and was promptly rejected because on health reasons. The doctor checked her out. She had a lifelong heart problem, and said, "You'll never survive North Africa." And so Lillias Trotter was not daunted at all, because she had some money and she found 2 other lady friends, and the 3 of them got on a ship on their own, and they went to Algeria because God had called them to this. They knew 0 Arabic. They were truly unprepared, but they got to Algiers. They found a house where they set up shop, the 3 of them, and they lived in the Arab section called the Kasbah, which rocked the Kasbah and all that. But that's actually a neighborhood in Algiers, which is the old historic neighborhood, and I think at the time was quite poor. And she and these 3 other ladies just started sort of trying to learn Arabic, and really their first outreach was to the children, because of course kids will talk to anyone, and I'm sure they looked quite weird, these white ladies in their neighborhood. She got to know the children, they got to know the mothers through the children, and they began to serve the women of their neighborhood and the children of their neighborhood, providing resources for them, I think maybe teaching them skills and trying to kind of coordinate the efforts of these women. So there they were in Algeria. She did learn Arabic, I guess, over time. She developed some sort of devotional and illustrated devotional books in Arabic. And her dream had always been to go further out into the desert. And she did that. She scouted out on camel. You can just imagine her out there in the desert with probably a very long dress on. And when she, yes, right, and the gloves, of course, and the sun hat. But there was Lillias Trotter out in the desert, and she met Sufis, and Diane might mention them too, these Muslim people. Are they always men? Women too? Okay, men who are sort of in the mystical wing of Islam. They would dance, these whirling dervishes, meditative dance, I think. And she was captivated by these Sufis in particular because she saw in them a passion for God and a real connection, a real spiritual hunger that she had. And so she exchanged ideas, I think, of spiritual life with these Sufi people, and even wrote some text about the Christian faith to connect with their faith. So I thought that was a really interesting piece, that she would find these soulmates out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, at least what seemed to her like the middle of nowhere. So she lived in Algeria to the end. She died in 1928, she was like 75, so she definitely outlived all expectations. And when she died, there were 13 mission stations in Algeria, more than 30 workers working with their little band, bringing what they said, bringing the light of the knowledge of God in the face of Christ. And her hope had been, of course, to see Christianity thrive in that country. It was not easy. The French were the colonial powers at the time. They were English Protestants, so they got a lot of heat from the French, actually. And of course, speaking of Christ and speaking of Christianity in a Muslim environment, there was, again, tension and resistance there. But as you'll see in this writing, I think she came to a place where she was faithful to what God had called her to do. And she loved the country and she loved the people. And she lived her life as an artist, as a Christian, as a woman, serving and following there. So just a really interesting story of a very courageous woman. So let's take a couple minutes to look at the reading. I mean, you can find, again, all these readings online, all the PDFs I post. It's on the Theological Horizons website under Vintage Lunch. So you can always, they're archives from forever. Back into the ancient, dusty troves of archives of PDFs. Okay, so I will read to you and then we'll pause and just think about some of these words, okay? We begin with this quote from Lillias Trotter. Many things begin with seeing in this world of ours. She says, see how this bit of oatgrass is emptying itself out. Look at the wide openness with which the seed sheaths loose all that they have to yield. And then the patient content with which they fold their hands, the content of finished work. She hath done what she could. That's a quote from Scripture. Oh, the depth of rest that falls on the soul when the voice of a beloved speaks those words. Will they be said of us? The seed vessel hopes for nothing again. It seeks only the chance of shedding itself. Its purpose is fulfilled when the wind shakes forth the last seed and the flower stalk is beaten low by the autumn storms. It not only spends, but is spent out at last. It is through Christ's poverty that we are rich. As poor in their turn, yet making rich is the mark of those who follow his steps. Are we following his steps? Are we? How the dark places of the earth are crying out for all the powers of giving and living and loving that are locked up in hearts at home. How the waste places are pleading dumbly for the treasure that lies there in abundance, stored, as it were, in the seed vessels of God's garden that have not been broken, nor emptied for his world, not freed for his use. Shall we not free it all gladly? It is not grudgingly or of necessity that the little casket, even here, if we suffer, we shall also reign with him. Let's take a moment to talk about these words. Is there anything that struck you that you noticed? Any phrase or idea?
I love the image of the seed vessel.
The seed vessel?
Awesome.
Uh-huh.
And the direct metaphor there of through Christ's poverty we are rich, just that idea of, how we should all strive to live life in his image. And that's, I don't know, there's something very exciting about that. I want to be a seed vessel. I want to have my one purpose be just to give. So that through my poverty, someone else can benefit, be rich. I love that. It's such a good image.
Yeah, I love that too. What are you thinking, James?
So, the line, it is not grudgingly or of necessity, like the little caskets broken with extending seed. I just, it's not something that's forced, it's just natural.
Yeah.
It happens naturally, and I think that's so beautiful that it's like that.
Yeah, it's not forced. That's what they're like, that's my thing.
I think the idea of the emptying out really got to me, the idea of being spent and being glad of being spent and emptied out. Just that feeling.
What about this phrase, the content, with patient content with which they fold their hands? It's just so cool how she sees this little plant. But the content of finished work. We were thinking in the first hour about, when are we ever feeling the content of finished work? What is that? No? I'm not the only one, right? What is that about? How do we experience contentment? Do you have to die? Is it just at the very, very end? Oh, come on. All right, so how do we get that? Why don't we have that? Yeah.
I feel it's like knowing that there's something coming after you. Because the seed opens up and all the seeds go everywhere, and then it finishes its job. And it knows that there will be future generations of the seed. So then its work is done. It knows there's a future.
Looking to the future, knowing it's for something. Yeah.
I think for me it reminds me of Sabbathing and the idea that when you pause and you realize that you're not the only one, you're not the one really working, you're a part of the work, but really God is working. And so when you do take that time to pause after finishing something, it just makes it all the more sweeter.
Yeah. Pausing and choosing Sabbath, choosing rest. How do we do that better? Any ideas? Or any experience with that?
I find that when I have other people to Sabbath with or to have that community with, it's so much
So finding other people, sort of making a plan, doing it. Yeah. Well, let's continue. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to where she says, "Oh, that we may learn to die." You see that? I think it's next to the, well, I have my questions on mine, so it's a little different. But anyway, you'll find it. "Oh, that we may learn to die to all that is of self, with this royal joyfulness that swallows up death and victory in God's world all around. He can make every step of the path full of the triumph of gladness that glows in the golden leaves." This is like for such a perfect. "Glory be to his name. And the outcome, like the outcome of the autumn, is this. There is a new power set free, a power of multiplying life around. The promise to Christ was that because he poured forth his soul unto death, he should see his seed, and he leads his children in their little measure by the same road. Over and over, the promise of seed is linked with sacrifice. As with Abraham and Rebekah and Ruth, those who at his bidding have forsaken all receive an hundredfold more now in this time. For sacrifice is God's factor in his work of multiplying. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. It is the poured out life that God blesses, the life that heeds not itself, if only other souls may be won. Ask and it shall be given unto you is one of God's nursery lessons to his children. Give and it shall be given unto you comes further on. The reason is this, that into the being that is ready to let the self-life go, God the Holy Ghost can come and dwell and work unfettered. And by that indwelling, he will manifest within us his wonderful divine power of communicating vitality, of reproducing the image of Jesus in souls all around. So what does she teach us about this season of autumn? Or how might you see this season differently now that you've read some of her words?
I really like the opening line because at first I thought it had a kind of antithesis to dying of all that is of the self and royal joyfulness, because I think when we use royal, we often think of the opposite of, not self-interest. We think of kind of superiority and
Yeah.
wealth. But I think once you get further into it, it's talking about God's glory, and it makes all the sense in the world that you would, stop focusing and indulging the self to do that. And I think when it ends with, it's the multiplying and the reproducing of Jesus' image all over, it goes right back to the seed. It's,
Yeah.
not focusing on the self, but giving the self up to spread that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also like that it's God's divine power that can communicate vitality. And I like that word vitality. And often in the winter and the fall when I get cold, I'm like, I have no vitality. That all of my vitality is found in his power. And just letting this self-life go so often I don't use that.
What do you think about this idea of sacrifice? Because when I hear we may learn to die to all that is self, I'm like, here we go. Here we go again. Like, I've got a problem with that. But I don't know. There's something different about her communication of sacrifice. I wonder what you're thinking and what's coming up for you. Maybe you don't have the problem with sacrifice that I do.
I agree. I definitely have the same problem with sacrifice. This kind of reminds me of the idea of a mother and her children, and that the time and energy she gives into her children, and who they will end up growing up to be after that. This time, energy, love, amount of prayer into their lives. Who knows what God will raise them up to be. and in sacrificing her time, like that multiplies into like other people's lives.
Yeah. That's good. I like that.
I think this
Yeah.
writing and like Lillias in general kind of reminds me of I think it was St. Francis of Assisi that we read
Yeah,
before.
Francis.
Francis, and just like I feel like they would have gotten along great. Because he's like writing about this self-sacrifice and he was living it like to a T. And I just, it almost seems like it's just so countercultural.
Yeah, so countercultural. I love that idea of that image of Lillias and Francis and Claire, like just running through the woods together. And she says something, there's some great quote from her when she's in Algeria, she's in the desert, you know, where I would be complaining about the camels and the food and whatever, how hot it is. I mean, so many things, the scorpions, I mean, don't get me started. She's like, something like, I want to find this quote because it's so awesome. Oh, how good it is that I have been sent here to such beauty. You know, it's just so incredible, right? That just that sunset, like I came all this way and I sacrificed all that for this. It's like, it was the best. Wow. Well, let's read a little more and then we'll take some time with Diane. I want to skip down to where she says, thus are we responsible, not for the tangible results of our ministry to others, but for its being a ministry in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. Let me read that again. Thus are we responsible, not for the tangible results of our ministry to others, but for its being a ministry in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. Such a ministry as will make those around us definitely responsible to God for accepting or rejecting the fullness of His salvation. If so, the signs following will not be wanting. It will be to the one the savor of death unto death, and to the other the savor of life unto life. But whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, they shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. I love that because I think about, you know, her life and what did success look like for her. And I almost hear her saying to herself, like, it's a seed, you know, the plant releases the seeds and then the plant is done. And she ends with this prayer. O Jesus the crucified, I will follow thee in thy path. Inspire me for the next step, whether it leads down into the shadow of death or up into the light. Surely, in what place my Lord the King shall be, whether in death or in life, even there also will thy servant be. Amen.
Speak that confidently about death.
I know, to speak about death. Well, I'm going to let Diane Trey come to this place with the little microphone, but before I do, I want to share, there's loads and loads and loads of art of Lillias Trotters that you can find online, lots of it. A bunch of it was found just recently because she had like 30 journals filled with art that they found in an attic.
I love that.
I know. And then I have a biography of hers, but it's just like super cool to explore. So I hope that you'll do that. But anyway, I'm going to put my mask on. And Diane's here from Africa.
Just for this lunch, you guys.
Just for this lunch.
Karen said, "Can you fly in?" And I was like, "Absolutely."
She came all the way.
For Karen.
How long did that take?
I'm just kidding.
God
we were
brought
already
you.
here, but
God brought you for this beauty.
yes.
Oh, for the blanket?
Okay, thank you. I'll just get that there. Get this here. Hi, Vintage. Hello, daughter. Well, a little about my enthusiasm, because I knew about Theological Horizons and the Bonhoeffer House before my daughter Zoe started school at UVA, because we have mutual friends. And they had at some point mentioned, and they were pretty excited about it. One of my good friends had graduated from UVA and knew the Marshes. And so then when Zoe went to school here and got involved, I thought, someday I want to go to a vintage lunch. And here I am. So I did take photos on the way in, and I just kind of feel like this is a big moment, whether I got to share or not, just to be in your midst. And of course, anything that Karen does is phenomenal. Yes, whether it's a lunch or writing a book or 2 or 3.
You should see me do laundry.
Yeah, I bet you're great at laundry too. I bet you're great at laundry. Anyways, I'm really happy to be with you all. I am very famously known as Zoe's mom. And this is Zoe. She has 3 other siblings. So I'm also known as their moms. But outside of being a mom and a wife, I also work for Young Life. It's really been a surprising, unsurprising calling, surprising career, I would say, as I look back at almost 30 years now. Yeah, I just didn't kind of go into it thinking this is going to be my career, because I was so sure of it in terms of the calling aspect early on and idealistically. And now looking back, I'm like, yeah, this has been a really good career that God gave me. And about 10 years into it, through a very random series of, well, not even a series of one invitation, and then a series of things that had to fall into place to say yes to that invitation, we're invited to move to Ethiopia. And so we moved there with Young Life when Zoe had just turned 5, actually. Zoe and her twin brother, and I had a nursing baby still. And so I had every reason to say no, and my husband and I said yes. And when Karen said she was going to be sharing about Lillias Trotter, I was unfamiliar. Once I looked her up, I thought, oh yeah, I have read some of her quotes. I did not realize what an artist she is, and I cannot stop staring at this photo, at this painting, exactly because of what you said about the seed and the casket. I just keep thinking about those seedlings, that when the seed looks like a casket and then it opens, I'll never see a seed the same. So I did do a little research just to learn more, and I found myself in one of her quotes, but also learning today from other things you shared, like all of us were like, wow, yes, I resonate with that. And how beautiful it is to be able to resonate with these holy and historical figures. But this quote is very fitting for me. Take the very hardest thing in your life, the place of difficulty, outward or inward, and expect God to triumph gloriously in that very spot. Just there, He can bring your soul into blossom. Take the very hardest thing in your life, that place of difficulty, outward or inward, and expect God to triumph gloriously in that very spot. Just there, He can bring your soul into blossom. That has really been a picture of my life. Not because I was so righteous or noble to intentionally take the hardest things to God, like now I'm going to take the hardest things to God. Really because I had nowhere to go but God, really, like just sort of more out of desperation. And but in those hardest spots, God, inward and outward, God really has brought the most amount of triumphant glory so that I do feel that bloom. And when we moved from Indiana, actually, the Midwest, to Ethiopia, we did so for a couple of years. And really with a pretty small vision. I wasn't like somebody who grew up hearing about missionaries. I mean, I actually didn't really, this sounds bad to say, but I didn't have like this innate respect for missionaries. I actually had the opposite. I actually was really skeptical about missionaries and thinking like, oh, what are they doing? Like kind of more colonialistic kind of wonderings and things like that. So I really have always rejected that kind of a term. But indeed, saying yes, bringing the hardship, and moving wasn't really the hardship. The Ethiopia or the land or Tanzania or the language or those things that people think would be the hard things aren't really the hard things. The hard things are harder to quantify, and that's for another day. But
I have to come back.
yeah, that one's the juicier version, got to be honest. But in that, through these years of really just being kind of like faithful to say yes to the next thing and bring the darkness to God, I've been able to experience that kind of bloom. So after living in Africa for almost 20 years, we were in Ethiopia for 4 years. We've been in Tanzania for 14, 15 years. I would say that the things that Lillias talks about of the seeds without really knowing, like when you were sharing, I feel like that's been a lot of my calling. Our mission is really for young people. And so we really don't get to see what's going to happen. I truly believe that the most important investment, the demographic worthy of the most investment is young people. And I actually believe that young people lead the world more than older people even realize. And so good job, leaders. That's you. You're doing a good job. Really, you really are. You're turning the ship around. We need that. But that's really been a big part, is the seeds, and without the knowing and having to trust. And when I am in a situation that I get to see a little bloom, that is very encouraging. So in my current position, I get to work alongside African, Middle Eastern, and Indian women into levels of leadership with our organization, which is really against all odds, actually. They have some stories of incredible oppression in their lives. And I get to be very much in the background and be able to really just help fill in leadership gaps that they may have missed along the way, whether that was because of education or opportunities to lead or a multitude of different challenges, and be able to watch these women bloom. And exactly what you said. Why does a sacrifice feel like a gift instead of a sacrifice? And it's because of that. So for me, any sacrifice that I've made, which seems very pale in comparison to what I get to watch these women be able to live out with their leadership and with their authority that they get to demonstrate within their own countries. And so I work with women in about 28 different countries, and it's actually very normal. It seems really glamorous and like, whoa, it actually isn't. It's a lot of being on a phone or a computer like the rest of us. But the people that I get to work with are phenomenal. And I don't know, I guess that's just my little story of where I sort of intersect with Lillias. I think Karen was seeing that. And if anybody has any questions or anything I missed, yes, yes.
My first question would be, just at the beginning of like knowing you wanted to go and like work in Young Life, like what did it like feel like to be called? Like what did that look like for you?
That is an excellent question. And for me, I had some clarity very, very early on from the Lord. That's part of my surprise. Like, I cannot believe it's really been the same theme throughout my whole life. But I definitely had a calling for teenagers while I was a teenager. So if any of you has that little stroke, like, wow, I really feel like this is something, keep listening to that. It may not be the whole story, but I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't part of it. And I kept thinking, I wish that I knew of something that was like to help teenagers. It's so dorky to look back on it now. But at the time, I really didn't know anything as a teenager that was like to help teenagers. And so I had a call for that. I thought, I'm going to do that. And so I kept looking down pathways that God might open up. I had recently started following Jesus as a teenager. And so I wasn't like a churchy type person. So I didn't have all that history or knowledge. So I just kind of kept seeking things out to go different pathways. And eventually it sort of all came together. So, yeah. It's also an unfolding, I would say, because it kept taking on a new facet. Calling, yeah. Anybody else? Anything goes. Even off topic, it's fine.
You wanted to like speak into the juicier parts.
The juicier parts. You know, God uses sinners. I'll just say that. That's really the juicier part. Like, we can never escape our sin. We can be forgiven. This is me saying this. Lillias probably would have said this a lot better. Karen would say this a lot better. But for me, I am just such a broken sinner. So like that, this quote, I'm still living it out. Oh, I lost it again. But I still am bringing those darkest parts inward and outward. And they're different now. But not all of them, actually. Some are still the same. That's pretty discouraging. But then it really gives space for more glory. So, that's pretty juicy.
What is one that God helped you out with?
What is a juicy part that God helped me out with? Well, I want to go real juicy, but I'm trying to think of a succinct, juicy one. Most of my stories are pretty... Unfortunately, there wasn't any quick fixes. But I would say, well, this one doesn't seem that juicy, but it can get me into a lot of trouble. And I'll talk about insecurity. And because insecurity has been one of those inward spots that can have a lot of outward ramifications and consequences, particularly in wanting to please people or wanting to be liked or not being true to who I am. Like, I've really come through a season of identity, and that unless we can truly embrace our full identity, then we will not be able, well, even our joy, everything is less authentic. Even our pain is less authentic unless we can truly start to like embrace our identity. And there's some parts of that that are extremely unique to me that really nobody ever will be able to understand. And that feels lonely. So that kind of can feed into insecurity. But then the other part of that, the flip side, is the trust that is really private and special between God and me, that God would know me in that way and no one else. And so that feels really intimate. So it doesn't sound very juicy, but insecurity has gotten me into a lot of trouble through the years. And the antidote to that is working through my identity and the very personal identity in who God tells us we are. But then that's also a very communal identity for all of God's beloved. So it also helps me love other people better because of their God-given identity. So we can get juicier, like from some other things.
I didn't have
if you
a
want.
particular juice requirement.
ask you this question, how we can follow you or know more about your work, or if we're interested in Young Like Africa, or just like how can we be fans of Diane?
Oh, well, I don't know about fans, but I'd love to be friends. And because I live far away, I am a social media user, much to my children's disgrace.
As long as you're not posting the baby.
I definitely post the baby photos. I definitely post the post-wisdom teeth pull photos and videos. Absolutely, I am that mom, 100%.
Yeah, so how can we see them?
Yeah, so you can follow their adventures from childhood onwards. No. Instagram is, kind of my drug of choice. But
Is it your name?
it's just Diane Larmy.
Larme.
Yes, and my mom spelled my name funny, Dyan. It's just pronounced regular. I'm Dylan. People think it's Dylan, so I answer to Dylan a lot. Every time I meet a Dylan, I'm like, hey, and then they're like, wait, what? So nothing it's not very interesting, but I'm always up for new friends.
And you're leaving tomorrow after 8 months in Charlotte?
Yes.
You got her right on the...
It's been a wonderful place of COVIDing. We've been COVID refugees here. So Charlottesville is very refugee friendly, even for those with COVID refugee status. So, yeah.
We hope you'll come back, and of course we get to hold Joey Rand.
Yes.
Well, let us close with a blessing and let Diane, you have to go pack. I think there's some things you got to do today.
Oh, yes. I've just
Sorry,
blocked that out.
I should've said
No, I'm so glad. It's fine. I'm joking.
content with
Yes, I am content.
content. So may the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again to our doors.
What part of Ethiopia were you in?
We were in Addis Ababa, the capital city. Have you been there?
I have, yeah. I went the summer before last.
You did? What did you go for?
It was a mission trip with my church.
Okay.
Very glad church is in.
Great.
Yeah, we went to it's a town called Metu. It's in Oromia.
Okay. Have you been following the political upheavals there?
Leave early, you
Not
come late.
a whole lot. I know there's.
Don't
I
ever
forget the
feel
guy's
stressed about that.
name.
Save your energy for
Do
something.
you remember? There's like an Oromo national.
Yeah, that's what the Oromo is really pressing in. So I just thought because you were in that vicinity.
Yeah.
It has gotten pretty bad. Right now it's going through a lull of peace, but it's always on the,
Apparently, I guess Abiy was locking people up or something.
and a lot of young people. Yeah, a lot of young people.
Yeah, one of the people that I met over there was pretty fired up about it. Yeah, I guess he just didn't live up to their expectations, really.
I mean, it is on the verge of civil war, really, as a country. So,
I mean, it seems like there's just such a tribal identity.
I think we're going to have to do
Precedence
s'mores.
yeah, there really is. Yeah. And that the tribal identity would be everything. And we see that a lot. We see that in Kenya. We've seen that. There's a lot of that throughout Africa, too. So it's
I don't know what, but it's
it's interesting because as we in the United States are really, having a reckoning with racism in a new level here, in Africa it's that way for tribalism, really.
Yeah. Unity is far away.
Community is far away. Yes, that's true. What's your name?
I'm Nate.
Nate. I'm Diane. Nice to meet you. Yeah, this is so fun. Do you come regularly?
I have been the last few weeks, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. It's a blessing.
Yes, and you can get good food. I think I'm still being recorded, Karen. Am I on? Am I on? So there's this guy who walked in the bar.
Your comedy routine?
Little comedy routine right here. Just go. Oh, it's live. Live. Karen, do you want me to go ahead and turn off your live? Okay, say bye, Nate. You're on. Bye bye.